Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. We really appreciate everybody coming out, especially at night. I know it's sometimes difficult, and we really appreciate you being here tonight. And in the short time that we have together, it's my hope that I'm going to pass along some tips and techniques that you could take along with you, whether you're a individual in need of some assistance with daily tasks, or you're somebody that knows of a family member that needs some assistance, or you're the caregiver family member. And to set the scene for this evening, I start with the poem Cranky Old Man, originally by Phyllis McCormick. And I'm sorry that it's Cranky Old Man. I was going to try to make it gender neutral, but I figured it's not a poem I wrote, so I was going to keep it with what it is. What do you see, nurses? What do you see? What are you thinking when you're looking at me? A cranky old man, not very wise, uncertain of habit, with faraway eyes, who dribbles his food and makes no reply when you say in a loud voice, I do wish you'd try, who seems not to notice the things that you do and forever is losing a sock or a shoe, who resisting or not lets you do as you will, with bathing and feeding the long day to fill. Is that what you're thinking? Is that what you see? Then open your eyes, nurse. You're not looking at me. I'll tell you who I am as I sit here so still, as I do at your bidding, as I eat at your will. I'm a small child of 10 with a father and mother, brothers and sisters who love one another. A young boy of 16 with wings on his feet, dreaming that soon now a lover he'll meet. A groom soon at 20, my heart gives a leap, remembering the vows that I promised to keep. At 25 now, I have young of my own, who need me to guide in a secure, happy home. A man of 30, my young now grown fast, bound to each other with ties that should last. At 40, my young sons have grown and are gone, but my woman is beside me to see I don't mourn. At 50 once more, babies play round my knee. Again, we know children, my loved one and me. Dark days are upon me. My wife is now dead. I look at the future. I shudder with dread. For my young are all rearing, young of their own, and I think of the years and the love that I've known. I'm now an old man, and nature is cruel. It's just to make old age look like a fool. The body crumbles, grace and vigor depart. There is now a stone where I once had a heart. But inside this old carcass, a young man still dwells, and now and again, my battered heart swells. I remember the joys, I remember the pain, and I'm loving and living life over again. I think of the years, all too few, gone too fast, and accept the stark fact that nothing can last. So open your eyes, people, open and see. Not a cranky old man. Look closer, see me. So we're here tonight to talk about senior autonomy, independence for our seniors, and guidance for families as roles are reversed. But maybe, however, instead of thinking of it as role reversal, we should be thinking of it as a change in relationships. A child doesn't have a legal responsibility for his or her parents unless they're given the legal authority, either through a power of attorney or healthcare directives or a conservatorship. There's no automatic authority over a parent by a child, unlike a parent's legal obligation to take care of his or her children during their minority. So we really aren't talking about role reversal, but rather how our relationships change as parents age and require more assistance and attention. A good part of what we're we do during our lives is defined by our age, as we heard in the poem a few seconds ago. At 5, we're excited to go to kindergarten. At 16, we look forward to driving. At 18, we can't wait to graduate from high school and go to college. At 21, we can't wait to drink. And the list goes on. Until we hit a point in our lives, and that may be different for different people, when we no longer think about the expectations for our future, but we turn our focus to our fears and concerns about our future. We start to worry about things like loss of independence, declining health, running out of money because of care costs, not being able to live alone, inability to care for ourselves, the possibility of having strangers come into our house to take care of us, not wanting to ask for help. A big one is not being able to drive, afraid of falling, and then afraid to be alone or being isolated from others. When we look at the elder care continuum, it's no mystery that as we age, our functioning decreases, our care options may change, the cost of our care may increase, and our need for assistance with the cost of our care might also increase. So how do we ensure to the best of our ability that you maintain your identity, your independence, your voice, so that people see you rather than making the focus on what they think you need? We can, of course, default to the traditional ways people plan for their incapacity, the execution of legal documents that designate individuals they trust to assist with their finances and healthcare decisions. So a power of attorney, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, it's a simple document, but it's a really powerful document that you put in place to designate an agent or agents to handle your financial affairs. By signing the document, you're not taking authority away from yourself to continue to handle your finances. What you're doing is you're giving someone else or a couple people the authority to help you out with your finances in addition to you. There's 2 different types of powers of attorney. There's a durable power of attorney and a springing power of attorney. A durable power of attorney comes into effect as soon as you sign the document. So whoever you're naming as your agent would be able to act and use that power of attorney to assist you, of course, if they knew of its existence. A springing power of attorney doesn't come into play until the happening of a particular event. So for example, your incapacity. And so what families sometimes do is they'll give a durable power of attorney to their spouse, and then they'll give a springing power of attorney to their children. And what the springing power of attorney will say that if my primary agent, so my spouse, is unable to act under the durable power of attorney, then my child is going to spring into action. It's essential, as Rich mentioned earlier, to be sure that you trust the individual or individuals that you're naming in the power of attorney. If you have multiple children and there's conflict between those children, currently, while you're able to handle your own affairs and you're making your own decisions, I could almost guarantee that that conflict is going to escalate and get worse when you get to a point where you're not able to handle your affairs for yourself. So it's something to consider when you're deciding who to name as your agent, because you want to make sure that looking to the future, and if you're naming multiple people, are they going to get along and agree on decisions? Or if they don't get along and you're naming one child and not another, what's that going to mean in the future? So you might want to consider naming a independent person rather than your bickering children. Then we turn to healthcare directives. And healthcare directives can achieve a number of different purposes. You can appoint a healthcare representative, someone to make healthcare decisions for you when you're unable to make them for yourself. And I think one of the most important things with naming a healthcare representative is having a conversation with the person or people that you intend to name as your healthcare representative, to be sure that that person knows what your wishes are with respect to your healthcare decisions. And once they know what your wishes are, making sure that that person is going to be able to convey your wishes if they're faced with a serious medical decision that they have to make on your behalf. Oftentimes, I think, we're quick to just assume that a spouse is the best person to serve in a role, and then your children as your backup. But unfortunately, when you're faced with a medical event, that may not always be the case. Perhaps there's a second spouse, and maybe children from a prior marriage. Maybe your children from a prior marriage are the better people to name as your representative because they might be more in tune with what your healthcare decisions are. Or maybe the daughter that lives closest to you, you think, well, it makes sense for that daughter to be named because she lives down the street and she'd be there quicker than my children that live out of state. But then you realize that if you have a serious medical event and that daughter has to make a decision, she's just going to be an emotional mess. So you just want to make sure that those individuals are going to know what your wishes are. So having that conversation in advance of that medical event, and then making sure that they're going to be able to convey your wishes and not be driven by emotion or guided by their own thoughts and beliefs and desires. In addition, healthcare directives may include your living will. A living will sets forth your wishes or your instructions regarding the use of life support. In the event you are terminally ill, permanently unconscious, or conscious but have irreversible brain damage without a hope for recovery, you're conveying your wish not to be kept alive with machines. Take note that a living will is different than a do not resuscitate order, commonly known as a DNR. They are often thought to be one and the same, but they achieve different purposes. A living will deals with life support decisions, whereas a DNR is a medical order which is written by a doctor and instructs healthcare providers not to do CPR in the event of an emergency. So we're talking about how to maintain independence, yet we talk about executing legal documents to address situations in which you may not be able to handle your finances or healthcare decisions. That may seem counterintuitive. It's true, but unfortunately, there may come a time in our lives when we just can't do it for ourselves anymore, whatever the it might be. Perhaps we have a memory impairment which prevents us from making informed decisions, or maybe we just don't want to be bothered with paying bills anymore because we've been doing that for so many years and we just want somebody else to do it for us. The goal is to give you the assurance that the people you have working for you are going to be working for you, working to convey your wishes, working to make sure your life runs like a well-oiled machine. And I know sometimes we're hesitant to even want to think about incapacity documents or illegal documents and who we want to designate, and we can't decide because we do have those bickering children, so we just say, you know what, I'm not even going to worry, I don't even want to think about it. Or maybe it's like the person who's afraid to do a will because they figure, if I do a will, I'm going to die. Or you could be like me, who I was hesitant for years to even look at other car insurance companies because I knew I could save money, but I thought, well, if I switch car insurance companies, then I'll probably get into that accident. We all have preconceived notions and reasons not to do things, whether they're warranted or just plain silly like mine. So what happens if, for whatever reason, we haven't gotten around to doing that power of attorney or health advance directives? What happens if we name one or more of our children and they disagree? What happens if we never told our family members that we executed documents and there's a medical event and nobody knows if and who has the authority to act for you? Are you just out of luck? Of course not. So a management tool that many people seem to be afraid of and they may want to try to avoid are conservatorships. Conservatorship proceedings are handled in the probate courts. And if you or your family find yourself in a situation like one of them I just mentioned, then it's possible to make application to the probate court for the appointment of a conservator. A conservator of your estate essentially serves the same role as an agent under your power of attorney, someone to handle finances, and a conservator of the person essentially serves the same role as a healthcare representative, someone to handle your health and personal needs. The main difference is that a conservatorship is under the probate court jurisdiction and there are reporting requirements. There's two different types of conservatorships. There's a voluntary conservatorship and an involuntary. In a voluntary conservatorship, you're making the petition to the court and you're asking the court to appoint a conservator for you. And you're going to choose who that conservator is going to be. There's no determination of incapacity in a voluntary conservatorship. You can terminate the conservatorship at any time with notice to the court. So why, you ask, would you want to have a voluntary conservatorship if you could just as easily, or be easier, just to do a power of attorney and advance directives? Sometimes there's situations when you might want the protection and the oversight of the probate court. Maybe, again, you have the bickering children, and you think it's going to be better if you have the probate court as kind of the gatekeeper to make sure that things are being handled the way you want them to be handled. An involuntary conservatorship is a bit more invasive, since the petition for that type of conservatorship is filed by someone other than you, whether a family member, a medical facility, sometimes adult protective services. This type of conservatorship may seem the scariest to people because you are giving up some rights and it seems like you're losing your identity and independence. Medical evidence is required in involuntary conservatorship, and there has to be determination of incapacity by the probate court. And the court has to determine that the appointment of a conservator is the least restrictive means of intervention. So what does that mean exactly? I could look at two different examples. Let's assume that you never get around to doing the power of attorney and healthcare directives. You have a serious medical event, you've been in the hospital for a couple weeks, you're unresponsive, in intensive care. The doctors have done everything for the emergency type of things. And now some decisions need to be made about your ongoing care and treatment. And some bills need to be paid. Maybe the real estate taxes needed to be paid. You're planning to pay those the last day of the month, and this happened, and now those are due too. Or other bills needed to be paid, whatever the case may be. So your children can make an application to the probate court for an involuntary conservatorship. But you have to keep in mind that, even though you're unresponsive, you're still a person, you're still entitled to a voice. So your voice in this particular situation would be coming through the probate court, okay? So they file a petition for an involuntary conservatorship at the probate court and ask to be appointed as the conservator of the estate and of your person. They provide the medical evidence, there's a hearing, the court reviews the medical evidence, and they review, kind of what's been going on. And then if the court makes a determination that you're incapacitated, then they also have to, again, look at whether the appointment of a conservator is the least restrictive means of intervention. So what does this mean? Is there any other way to address your needs without appointing a conservator? And in this particular situation, since you never did a power of attorney and didn't do healthcare directives, nobody has the authority to speak for you or handle your finances. So in this case, a conservator would be appointed because it would be determined to be the least restrictive means of intervention. The conservator of the estate would have to file periodic accountings with the court. So that gives you continued protection that your finances are being handled properly. The conservator would also have to file periodic reports as to your medical condition, because I don't want you to think that just because it's an involuntary conservatorship, once it's done, that's the end of it, and there's nothing you can do about it. It is the case that most times, once there's been a determination of incapacity, that the diagnosis kind of progressively gets worse, doesn't improve. But there are situations, say somebody has a traumatic brain injury, or say you had a stroke and you recovered and had the rehab and you're doing better. If that's the case, then you could go back to the probate court and you would have an attorney appointed for you if you can't hire your own. And you could say to the probate court, listen, I'm better. I could handle my own affairs, and there'd be additional medical documentation showing your current diagnosis. And then there are cases when the conservatorship can be terminated, which is a good thing. So it doesn't happen often, but I just want you to be aware it is possible. In my second example, let's say that you have a power of attorney and advance directives, but you have a memory impairment and you're making decisions that are kind of viewed as detrimental to your safety or well-being. Remember that unless a court has made a determination of incapacity, you can legally still make your own decisions. But the question is whether or not you're making sound decisions and whether they're affecting your well-being. So let's say your son is named as your agent under your power of attorney, and he's your healthcare representative. And you live together, but he was working during the day, and you've started to wander a bit. So he's concerned for your safety while he's not there. So he thinks it's best to have somebody come in and stay during the day with you. And the first thing you're thinking is, here we go. This is the start of me losing my independence. My identity. I'm telling my son I don't want anybody to sit with me, but he doesn't understand, and I just don't like this whole idea. So your son hires a caregiver to come in to stay with you during the day, and you fire that caregiver because you can, because again, there's been no determination of incapacity. So this pattern continues for a couple weeks, until one day you wander out the front door disoriented and you can't find your way back home. So your son has to decide what's he going to do, because just because he's your healthcare representative, he can't override your decision not to have a caregiver in the house. So he could go to the probate court and ask for the appointment of a conservator. And it's involuntary with the medical evidence. And again, the court needs to make a determination of whether the appointment of a conservator is the least restrictive means of intervention. So when we're looking at a conservator of the person, let me back up for a second, I apologize. The court, as part of the application, is going to look for copies of any powers of attorney and healthcare directives that are in existence, and they give deference to those documents. So they're going to see that you've already appointed your son as your agent and healthcare representative. And the court's going to ask, well, why aren't those documents working for you? Why do we need a conservator? Because again, they're trying to determine whether or not the appointment of the conservator is the least restrictive means of intervention. So when we look at the conservator of the person, you're going to determine that, okay, there's the conflict between hiring and the firing of the aides, and it probably is in your best interest to have somebody with you during the day. So the appointment of a conservator of your person would likely be the least restrictive means of intervention, because what that's going to do is that's going to give your son the authority to override your decision. But on the conservator of the estate side of things, likely in this situation, the courts would say that your son is able to handle your financial affairs without the appointment of a conservator. So I don't really think that the appointment of a conservator of your estate is necessary. It's not the least restrictive means of intervention. So continue handling things under the power of attorney. So you can have a split like that. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Of course, there's costs associated with both types of conservatorships. So typically the preferred method is powers of attorney and healthcare directives. But again, by utilizing these documents, people generally feel greater independence and feel like they don't have the supervision of the courts, so more control and things like that. But again, there are situations when it is beneficial to have the probate court as a gatekeeper. We see it most often when there's kids that are disagreeing about how a parent is being cared for or how money is being managed and things like that. So unfortunately, financial elder abuse is very prevalent, and the primary offenders typically end up being family members and caregivers, outside caregivers. So we've already talked about conservatorships and ways to give us some protections through the probate court while perhaps maintaining our independence. But often it becomes necessary to bring outside caregivers into the picture, maybe due to the level of assistance that you require, or maybe the family, your kids live out of state, or whatever the case may be. So what are some things that could be done to kind of give us protection from the unrelated caregivers? Rich mentioned it briefly before, but one method that we've used for some of our clients is a TrueLink card. And TrueLink cards can help a number of different situations. With this card, if you have a caregiver that does grocery shopping for you, runs errands for you, things like that, their spending can be monitored through the use of this card. And it could be restricted too. So the card is linked to your bank account, and you or a family member can customize the uses of this card. So when you set up the account online, there's a list of different uses for the card, whether grocery, you kind of just click off whatever you want to use it for. Grocery, prescriptions, gas, all different things. So you could kind of control it on your end, but then again, it also gives you the protection and limits what a caregiver might be able to use that card for. And then you get an accounting of how the money is being spent, and you maintain it that way. Another use for this card is when somebody's receiving public benefits, so like supplemental security income, SSI, where you could only, if you use your money for shelter costs or different things like that, you might minimize the amount of benefits you're receiving. So this card would allow you to, again, customize the uses so that there's no possibility that by accident the card's not used for something that's going to result in a minimization of your benefits. And then also it could protect vulnerable seniors from telemarketers or scammers. Unfortunately, seniors are often target for all these scams and telemarketers and things like that. So it's a great tool to use, and it's very simple to set up online, and the card comes within a week usually. So once the legal aspects have been taken care of and you've designated people you trust to help with your finances and personal affairs, then what else can you do to maintain your independence? What can family members do to help comply with your wishes? Whether you're a caregiver or care recipient, there's challenges that we face, fears and changes that we're all confronted with, all things that we often resist and are hesitant to handle. How many times have we heard from a family member, or have we said the following? And I think I heard like half of these from my mother this weekend. I don't want to burden my children. Why won't my kids listen to me? I don't want to interfere. I hope I didn't slow you down. I know they want to help, but I just don't want a relationship to change if they have to start taking care of me. I love my children, but... Or how many times have you heard a caregiver family member, or have we said the following? I'm afraid I'm not making the right decision for my mother. I feel like I'm not doing enough. I feel so bad that I wasn't able to do enough to keep my father at home. I don't know how I'm going to be able to take care of my grandmother and keep up with my work obligations and my family obligations. I love my parents, but I wish mom and dad would just tell me what they need. So whether you're a caregiver or you're a care recipient, there are feelings of guilt, obligation, love, selfishness, selflessness. Simply keeping the lines of communication open and listening to each other can make all the difference in the world. Maybe your grandmother needs help with her grocery shopping, but she just doesn't want to ask because she doesn't want to inconvenience you. So instead, if you sense that getting out of the house may be difficult for your grandmother, offer to do the grocery shopping for her. Don't wait for her to ask, because maybe she never will. Technology has greatly expanded our options when families don't live in close proximity. It used to be the case that life alert buttons that had to be pressed when you fall was an elderly person's only saving grace. I always wonder what would happen, though, if somebody fell and was unconscious and couldn't press the button. So now they have life alert systems that go off if there's a rapid change in position. So if you fall, the life alert will automatically send a signal for help. We also have things like Skype and FaceTime, so families can stay connected even from opposite ends of the country. So I think it gives parents and children a sense of security because there's a visual check-in. An idea that was recently mentioned to me at a presentation I had done a couple months ago, which I thought was a really great idea, was to have a family meeting before the medical event happens. We all seem to panic once we're faced with a medical event, but who says we need to wait until we get to that point? Have a family meeting with everyone participating, and maybe even come up with a family mission statement. Family mission statements don't have to be reserved for businesses. Allow time for everyone to talk about, what their concerns are, what their limitations are, their expectations. It may be the case that one of your children has a strength you weren't even aware of, and another one is interested in helping in a different way. Work together to develop a plan in advance so everyone is on the same page. Of course, situations change, so it may become necessary to update that plan as time goes by. But at least if you have that initial conversation and you have a plan and you're on the same page, there's less likelihood of everybody kind of scrambling when we are faced with that medical event. Make sure to keep everybody involved. Even if mom or dad or grandma or grandpa appears to be a bit more forgetful, that doesn't mean that he or she doesn't deserve a chance to voice his or her opinions or participate in decision-making, in deciding who that caregiver should be. Continued involvement by everybody is really important. And the next thing I'm going to say, it's not meant to be a sales pitch for a particular care agency, but in preparing for tonight, I came across a concept developed by Comfort Keepers called interactive caregiving. And the type of caregiving promotes physical, mental, social, and emotional well-being. It focuses on the whole person, helps seniors live the highest possible quality of life by keeping them happy and engaged, fosters healthy, independent living within their own homes. this is exactly what we're talking about tonight. Ways to get caregivers and care recipients to work together so that those being cared for will feel included and not lose their identity. Maybe some of these things seem extremely obvious, but often what's right in front of us is overlooked. I want to end with two personal examples to further show how a caregiver and a care recipient can easily view things differently. Prior to my aunt's death a few years ago, every Saturday morning I would pick her up, bring her grocery shopping, and then we would typically go to lunch. Of course, this became a weekly ritual for her, something she looked forward to. She enjoyed the weekly visit and quality time with me. In addition, every morning on my way to work, I would call her to check in with her, something else she looked forward to. These daily and weekly rituals gave her something to look forward to and enjoy. By bringing her shopping, she was staying involved and not feeling isolated. If there was a week that I couldn't bring her shopping, she might go herself, but usually she wouldn't, because we all know she had enough food to feed an army anyway. She was disappointed the weeks we missed, and disappointed the days I only had enough time to bring her shopping and not go to lunch. If I missed a day of calling her on my way to work, my phone would ring because she wanted to be sure I was okay. This time meant a lot to her, and it meant a lot to me too. But honestly, at times, I would think how easy it would be for me just to run and get the groceries for her, or how I had 10 other things I could be doing instead of spending half of every Saturday with my aunt. But that would have isolated her, not made her feel involved, and a host of other things. And on that one day, when I called her on my way to work, and she didn't answer, and I kept driving to work, but felt that it was odd that she still didn't answer, I called her a few more times, and still no answer. And I'm thinking, this is odd. Typically, she tells me if she has an early appointment, and 7:30 in the morning. So, of course, instead of going to work, I drove to her house that morning to make sure she was okay. When I knocked on the door, rang the doorbell, still no answer. Finally, I let myself in to find out she had passed the night before. That's when I realized how important it was for me to take her grocery shopping all those times, to share those daily phone calls with her, to make her feel included, and to keep her independence and a voice, and give her a voice until her last day on earth. And I missed those shopping trips for quite a while after and those daily phone calls. So I don't want to end on a sad note. I leave you with one quick story. For many years, I helped my grandmother out with her shopping, medication management, had many long talks with her about her wishes, brought her to doctor's appointments, kept her home as long as I could, before it became unsafe for her to be there. And of course, I had those feelings of guilt because I felt like, she should be able to stay home. But, we get to a point when you realize that you just can't do it anymore. My grandmother smoked Chesterfield unfiltered cigarettes for 70 plus years. So when she finally had to go to a nursing home, despite the fact that I was never a big fan of her smoking, I honored her wish to find a facility that had an outside smoking area. Do you know how hard it was for me to find Chesterfield unfiltered cigarettes? There was one pharmacy in town that had 9 to 5 hours and 9 to 1 on Saturdays that sold these cigarettes. And they didn't always have them in stock. So when they did, I'd stockpile these cigarettes. I knew smoking wasn't good for my grandmother's health. I knew that the doctor told her that she shouldn't continue smoking. But I also knew that my grandmother was 90 years old. And if smoking was going to make her happy and would make her feel like she still had a voice and can make her own decisions, then I was going to do everything possible to make that happen. I understand that there are so many things that need to be taken into consideration in coming up with a care plan for an individual or in deciding what is safest and the best thing for somebody. However, these are not decisions that should be made unilaterally. And like the cranky old man in the poem I started with, open your eyes, people. Open and see. Look closer. See me. Thank you.